Morning, everybody. I'm Giles, this is Steve. Just quick show of hands, who's heard of BuzzSumo in the room? About a third. And Brandwatch, who's heard of Brandwatch? Just over a third, Steve, sorry about that. So BuzzSumo is it's a freemium tool. It's a content analysis tool. If you go to buzzsumo.com, sign up for an account, you can basically get a view on any content you can probably wish to think of over the last 5 years, and you get share data, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, LinkedIn.
Yeah, and link data, yeah.
On all of that content. And then there's a Facebook analyzer where you can see how things get shared on Facebook. It's a phenomenal content marketing tool. It's ridiculously cheap and amazingly powerful. And Brandwatch is a platform for people to basically mine the web for consumer insights and understand what the world's thinking about various things. So that's a kind of very brief overview. Brandwatch is a bit more expensive, but it's well worth it, obviously. And Steve and I have known each other for a couple of years. Brandwatch actually ended up acquiring BuzzSumo last month. We're delighted to do that. Massive fans of him and the team. There were only 11 of them, and they didn't have an office. And they've built this company with over 3,000 subscribers and 400,000 users. So it's extraordinary what they've done. I'm a huge fan. But so there's a little intro to Steve. What we're going to do is use the hashtag of the event, Wave17Summit, for any questions you've got, because we don't have a roaming mic. So if you've got questions for Steve or for me, use the hashtag, and I'll try and get to them. Broadly speaking, because Steve is, his business is way more kind of involved with or influential around kind of influencer marketing, I'm going to be asking him a bunch of questions, but I might chime in with some of my own opinions if I think that they're useful, which they may or may not be. Steve, could I ask you to set the scene? I know you've just put a few slides together on kind of explaining to the good folk here how content has changed over the last, the content landscape has changed over the last few years.
Okay, yeah, because it's what we do is we track content, and we're always trying to work out what content works. And it obviously works in different contexts. It might get you leads, conversions, etc., awareness, but we're always trying to track the content that's getting published, what content's resonating with an audience. And I think the general view is that obviously it's never been easier for you to create content. You can now create videos, etc., superbly, fastly, but it's never been harder to gain attention and engagement, and that's partly because of content overload. So if you were publishing, I'll just put a simple chart here. These are WordPress posts hosted on WordPress. So they're a small section of the internet. If you're publishing back in 2008, 9, you're competing with a number of posts, but as we move on through to 2010, 12, that's increasing. As we move on to today, we're just seeing an exponential increase in the amount of content that's being published. So you're competing with more and more content. And that's giving rise to something that people generally call content shock. But what I've been keen to do is try to put a shape on that. What does content shock actually look like? What does it mean in reality? And it really looks something like this. I pulled, for the last 5 years, the number of articles published about influencer marketing. So these are just articles about influencer marketing. And we can see in about 2014, marketers do this generally. They ruin it for everyone else. Something becomes really popular. Marketers say, we must write 5 tips on influencer marketing, whatever it happens to be. The content volume shoots. So the blue line is all those marketers publishing lots and lots of articles about influencer marketing.
And the y-axis is y-axis on this side is blue, and on that side it's red, right?
And the red ones are the average shares of those articles. And so you can see, as content shock takes hold, average shares just fall away.
From 250 down to 65
Yeah, so it drops away. And then we see this pattern again and again and again. Doesn't matter the topic, we see it again and again. And so it means if you're a content marketer, you want to be in on the left-hand side of that chart, build your authority, build your reputation. If you try to come in at the right-hand side, you've got to produce exceptional content to break through there, because there's a lot of content, a lot of people who know about it. So you've got to produce exceptional content, which tends to be research-style content, comprehensive content, long-form content. we can prove conclusively long-form content gets more shares, and the great thing is there's less competition. So it gets more shares partly because most marketers are lazy, they write sub 1,000 word posts. So if you pull 100,000 posts about marketing, I can almost guarantee that less than 1,000 will be over 2,000 words. So the competition is less if you're publishing long-form content. But we see this shape again and again. As people publish a lot of content, it gets harder to gain traction for people. And then as a consequence, you get this. In any normal distribution, you'd expect you publish a post, some posts do well, some posts do less well, and there's a nice bell curve distribution, and in the middle is your average. Actually, distributions always look like this. So I took the articles from the top 100 B2B sites. You can argue with me about which ones should have been in the list, but what I thought were the top 100. And you can see these are average shares, really. Most of their posts are getting less than a couple hundred shares, most of their posts. And there's a long tail that goes out from here to Brighton, probably, in terms of the ones that do 100,000 shares, etc. And even for those top 100 sites, so we're talking TechCrunch and sites like that, basically, only 4% of their posts get more than 3,000 shares. So in terms of just setting the scene, it's hard to get attention. So my view on this is that you can't just publish and expect people to find your content, clearly. The New York Times, yes, you have a big audience, but most of us, we need a strategy to amplify that content, and that's where influencer marketing comes in. But you need a strategy. In my view, you spend 50% of your time creating the content and then 50% of your time amplifying that content. Otherwise, my view is, particularly in the world of content shock, it will just sink without trace. So content amplification to me is really critical, and there's just some of the data behind it.
Awesome. Got a couple of questions coming in already, which is great. I've noted them down. When you think about actually creating a piece of content, talk me through the stages that you go through when you're thinking about taking that content into the public domain.
Okay, I mean, there are a number of different stages. The first stage is, what you have a content strategy, you have different elements of the funnel. So you'll need content for different stages of your funnel, for awareness, for conversions, for leads, etc. But what we tend to do is we try to understand our audience and what content resonates with that audience. So we start with research about what sort of content's resonating with this audience. What do they share? What do they like? What are the authors they like, for example? So we try to research that as a starting point, really. We know from our own experience that long-form content, those things work. I would say we spend...
Would you say that long-form content works in general, or would you say long-form content works specifically for a deep topic like content marketing that you tend to write about?
I think people have got limited time, so people love list posts, they love skimmable content, so they do like short-form content. But if you want to get a high level of shares, and particularly if you want a high level of links to your content, it's really got to be long form. Long form content people link to because it's comprehensive.
And long form is what, more than 500 words?
Typically, I'd say more than 1,500, 2,000 words I would define as long form. So we would look at the sorts of content that works. We do a lot of research for our posts. We don't just write it. We tend to do quite a lot of research. And the reason we do research is we try to get views from the people who are going to amplify the content up front. So before we start writing the content, we think about who's going to amplify it. So I wrote a post on headlines, which for us, we're a small blog, did relatively well, got some 16,000, 17,000 shares. Before I started writing it, I did all the research.
That's more than relatively well.
Relatively well, but not compared to TechCrunch, but
okay,
something like that.
Fair enough.
But for us, before I wrote it, I engaged a number of influencers, so Mark Schaefer, Leon, Anne Hanley, etc., and said, I've got this research on headlines and what works, what do you think? I got them involved in the article to help me when I wrote the article. It helped me know that they were likely to share it. So even before I write the article, I think about who's going to share it, who's going to link to it, because that's what's important to me. I need it amplified.
And I'm just going to quickly interrupt with a quick question here. Sorry. Likes, shares, retweets, or I'm going to add links. For you, which is the most important?
It depends what you're trying to do. To build initial traction and awareness, it's normally shares, because shares explode really quickly. It's almost frictionless for people to share things. Over time, links are really still powerful. People argue about links, but they're still really powerful. It's hard to get a link because someone's got to write a blog post or write something, put a link to your post, and it takes longer to gain links than it does to gain shares. But they have longevity. They work and they last a lot longer. So. Cool. You ideally want both, but sometimes you're focusing on shares and other times it's on links.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Once we've produced the content, we then spend, I'd say, 20% of our time arguing about the headline. We always write at least 10 headlines for every article we publish.
Do you ever A/B test them?
We do A/B test in a simple way because we don't have a big enough audience like BuzzFeed A/B test, like 10 headlines. We tried putting them out in tweets, LinkedIn posts, Facebook posts, and we see which ones resonate when we tweet them out first.
So the headline might be different in the tweet to the actual...
Yeah,
Okay.
It'll often be different. But we spend a lot of time arguing about the headline because often the headline is the thing that's shared, it's the thing that's seen, it's the thing that has the promise of why somebody clicks through to your content.
Just a quick plug, Steve wrote an amazing blog post on, how many headlines did you analyze?
We pulled 100 million headlines and then we just analysed what worked, yeah.
So go to the BuzzSumo blog. That is an amazing blog post. It's been shared in an enormous amount of time. Somebody said it was the most important piece of marketing in 2017.
Yeah, it was one of my influencers. That was very nice. It was a guy called Andy Crestadina. But so we argue a lot about the headlines, and then we think a lot about promotion. And our view is you're better to publish early in the week because you need to build momentum. And as soon as you hit Friday, the momentum slows. So you've got to publish Monday, Tuesday if it's a really important piece of research. Obviously, you're doing regular posts, it's different.
And we were looking at that on the way up here,
yeah.
and it seems to me from most of the stuff that we're looking at, the half-life of a piece of content is about 36 hours. So after 36 hours, the number of shares of a piece of content, it halves from what it was at its peak.
It drops. It can depend on whether people re-promote it and the influencer picks it up. But as a general rule, if you take that headlines piece, I think it's got 17,000 shares now. At the end of the first week, it had 16,000. 6 weeks later.
6 months ago.
6 months ago. So in 6 months, it's still a great piece of content, I hope, but it's only picked up 1,000 shares. People generally don't go back and share a lot of older content as a general rule. So you build the momentum quickly. Our view is you want to get all your promotion out there on the same day, and you want to be the story for the one day rather than drip feeding over a week. So on that post, for example, I lined up all the influencers to share it at the same time. I told them when it was going to be published. I got all 10 of those big influencers to share it at the same time. We did Facebook ads to promote it, and I mailed it to 200,000 people. So that wasn't short, it was quite a lot. But I also thought back, headlines are important to journalists and people, so I deliberately mailed a whole range of journalists, and they can be fantastic influencers because they have reach. They may not have huge Twitter followings, but they have reach on their platform. In that case, I had one New York Times journalist retweet my article. His tweet got retweeted 600 times. So just one person got 600 retweets because his audience was interested in headlines. So we focus on paid promotion, influencer amplification, mailing our own users, all on the same day, so we can try and be the story of that day to build momentum. And then we know after 3 or 4 days it will die. But that's typically what we do.
You line the influencers up to be like a cohort of publishers almost that help you amplify your content.
Yeah, they're almost individually their own little broadcasters, really. So
it's probably a good moment to go to the
and we're going to talk about this because I read a book about why stuff goes viral, which is a really good read. It was a New York Times bestseller last year. It talks about films, books, etc. But there's lots to learn for us as content marketers. And basically, the premise of the book is that nothing goes viral. Nothing actually goes viral. Even 50 Shades of Grey didn't really go viral in the traditional sense. So traditionally, people said it was broadcast. You had to be on a TV channel, you broadcast it to people. And then people said, well, the way we move on is viral distribution. I tell Giles, Giles tells 2 other people, they each tell 2 other people, and we get this viral spread. We can almost prove that very rarely ever happens. What actually happens is something like this, is that my 10 influencers are each individual broadcasters, and most people pick it up from them. I also get it covered in certain magazines, etc. I send it out via my email. There is some viral sharing, but actually it's incredibly rare. So to just publish something and hope it goes viral, it happens sometimes, but it's incredibly rare. What you need is a strategy to get that out there. And so these multiple broadcasters are important. So for me, I had 10 influencers lined up. I had an email lined up. So it's multiple broadcasts. You can't rely on that viral distribution because it very rarely actually happens.
For me, that's one of the most insightful things I've seen recently when we were talking about this earlier today. It's amazing, and it chimes with something that one of our big customers, FMCG brand, was telling me, which is this advert that went viral, that got millions and millions of shares or millions of views, that we all thought was just a product of us sharing, had a huge paid media spend behind it. So they paid to get it out there, and because it was good content, it did get shared a lot. but the initial push, and it was not cheap. Yeah. It was like, okay, we're gonna pay for this kind of diffuse broadcast.
You've got to get momentum behind it, and you see it. This book was quite good about talking about how films are promoted. For 1 week, they basically are on every TV channel, radio show, posters on the tube, etc. They just get it out there to get that momentum behind it. And this is an interesting. This is from a Yahoo survey 2 years ago, so it's a bit old now, but they did a study and found that 90% of people, in terms of news content, either saw it directly from the original source or from just 1 degree of separation. So Giles shares a TechCrunch story, I read it from there, not me sharing it with somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. So I do think if you're thinking about content amplification, your influencers are part of that diffuse broadcast strategy. And I would say you always try and want to get 5 to 10 of your influencers to really advocate and promote your particular content. And I can talk a lot about different types of influencers you might want within that, because I think journalists are much neglected. My best influencers are normally quite junior. They're normally interns at some of the really big newspapers. I dig out and I research all the time to find interns at the big newspapers. And then I say, I've got loads of data, I'll do research for you, I'll help you, because they're starting out on a career. But they can be influential in getting us mentioned, included in articles, etc. So some of my best wins have been by reaching out to people who have reached because of where they are and what they can do sometimes. So I think journalists are much neglected, as are sometimes just experts in a particular space, really. And
let's use that.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to that after what I want to go to next, which is let's try and unpick some stuff around quality. So again, we were talking this morning, what is an influencer? And one of the things he said is not about followers. And I came back with saying, well, it has to be somewhat about followers, or reach has to play some role. But tell me how you think about the quality of an influencer and the stats around him.
I think people put too much attention on numbers of followers, which I generally think is not that valuable. They have reach, but I don't think it's valuable. I think an influence for you is somebody who has an engaged audience that cares about what you're writing about. So we were joking on the way up. Cristiano Ronaldo could say BuzzSumo is the best content marketing tool in the world.
He'd be right.
Yeah, hopefully he does. But it's not going to help us overly, because his engaged audience isn't our engaged audience, for example. So you need somebody who has the word I use is an engaged audience. So I look for people's retweet rates on Twitter. If you use BuzzSumo or other tools, you can see their retweet rate, which is, on average, how many times when they tweet do they get retweeted. And
what's a good retweet rate?
Well, anything over 2 is actually a really good retweet rate.
2%?
No, 2.
Oh, right.
So if somebody got retweeted twice, that's actually good. Most people here, I suspect, won't have a retweet rate of 2. It's amazing. People tweet a lot, but the number of retweets is quite low. So if you take Rand Fishkin, who's a lot of you will know here, he's got 300,000 followers. His average retweet rate is 16. So if he tweets something for you, on average, that'll get 16 retweets.
So as a percentage, that is very low, isn't it?
It's very low. As a consequence, there'll be further reach, etc. But I look at retweet rates. So that one New York Times journalist tweeted it once, he got 600 retweets for us. So I've looked and I've looked and I've looked. There is no relationship between the number of followers somebody has and the average retweets they get. There is simply no relationship between them, not even an inverse one. So you've got to find engaged, people have an engaged audience that matters to your, it could be that to your audience, it may just be somebody who's got 500 followers, but they've got a retweet rate of 100 because they just write about stuff which is really relevant to your audience. So finding engaged people. So influencers, I don't look for the people with millions because they're chased by everybody, they want to be paid, etc. The other thing I think you need is advocates. Getting a retweet from Rand is good. Might get 16 retweets. It might get us more stuff. But in his particular case, he's passionate about our product, and he'll be on a stage like this, and he'll say, you really should use BuzzSumo. And when he does that, we see our subscriptions peak, etc. Because he's an advocate, he's passionate about it. And I think just getting a retweet from someone, it's helpful, but you really want to build advocates. So what we tried to build was, initially we tried to build 10 core advocates for BuzzSumo. I now work with 20, but no more than 20. But I try and work with quite big names in the content marketing
space. And no more than 20 because that's too many for you to handle.
Yeah, I can't build good relationships with more than 20 people because I'm trying to do research for them, be helpful for them. So in the case of Rand, I was saying, like, all this research, what would you like me to do? He said, I'd really like to know if there's a correlation between shares and links. Is there a correlation? So I said, we can do that. We pulled a few million posts. We did a research post, still one of the top posts on the Moz blog. So to do that, I'm building relationships. I'm doing research. I can't do that for lots of people, really. I can only do it for a certain size. And I think you only need a certain size. If you can get 10 good influencers to share your content, it will give you momentum that you need, I think.
Awesome. And that links nicely to another thing that I've written down here around topics. So the quality of somebody's audience depends on how relevant that audience is to what you're selling or trying to message. How do you go about how do you think about that kind of targeting thing? Do you go for super targeting, or do you think actually I want reach as well as specificity, or as well as targeting? Or
I think fundamentally the best content is content that's valuable to your users. So I think you've got to think about where do you have content information that's valuable to your users, because that's fundamentally what matters. It has to deliver real value. It has to deliver helpful content to your users. So I think, so we start by saying, where do we have? So we have data, but you might have case studies, etc. You might have different things, but where do you have real value? Where can you contribute real value to that? We do look for gaps. So on the headlines post, we'd noticed that no one had done any really serious research about headlines, not in that scale. So we saw a gap. So we do look for gaps in the market. We know people are interested in headlines. We researched it a lot using BuzzSumo and felt, actually, there's a lot of interest in headlines, but we can't see any really good comprehensive content. So why don't we produce it? So we're trying to target a gap.
Your research, time spent in research is seldom wasted. Let's move to something else which I think is maybe a little bit counterintuitive, or at least it's very interesting, which is that your first graph or your second graph, which is the number of shares decline as the amount of content increases, or average shares. And we see that again and again and again across more mature topics, but there are some topics which that is not the case for, and the two that spring to mind are, around politics and cryptocurrency and things like AI. Say a little bit about that. I think around the timing issue.
Yeah, because if you go back to that original, what does content shot look like at the moment? There's always topics that are on that left-hand scale at the moment. There are always topics where the amount of interest and the amount of content people want to consume is greater than the number of articles. So the skill is finding those topics. So whether it's blockchain or cryptocurrency or artificial intelligence last year or driverless cars last year, there are always new topics. The great thing for all of us is there are always new topics. And there are always new topics in your industry that become in vogue. The key is to be one of the first into those topic areas and not one of the later ones into the topic areas. So the good news is there are always new topics. There are always new takes on topics. But you've got to be analysing that and trying to get in early into that particular topic. So yes, there's always topics on that left-hand edge. So fake news we were talking about. Fake news, there are loads of articles being published on fake news, but actually the interest is even higher. So the consumption average shares for articles on fake news are going up, even though the number of articles is going up.
So the ROI on the content will tend to be higher because of the tendency of people to share.
Yeah, people have a real appetite for that content at the moment, which is not being satisfied. So if you can write in-depth posts about that stuff, there's a real thirst for it. So
how do you find that stuff?
Areas.
How do you find that stuff?
I think what we did, we tried to research what's happening out in the market. We see the sort of content, the trends. It's just keeping your eyes open.
You use BuzzSumo for that?
we use all sorts of tools, but we're including BuzzSumo as well.
What else do you use, just a matter of interest?
Well, I use Twitter as well to see what's working on Twitter, for example. So I use a range of tools. I see what's happening in newspapers, what are sort of terms coming up, what sort of expressions are people using. There's because there's always that a phrase the industry, the newspaper industry used a long time ago, because it's CP, a sub-editor's preferred expression. So somebody might call it, I forget what, community charge, I think Margaret Thatcher tried to call it. All sub-editors called it poll tax. It's like Brexit. Brexit is the preferred expression. So you have to see which ones are emerging and use those for your industries, really. Because you can try to create your own. If you're big, you can do that. HubSpot did it for inbound marketing, really. They primarily do outbound marketing, but they really own inbound marketing as the topic. So it's trying to find those. It's always looking for the new ones, but try to be the first in. If you just write another Me Too post, the danger is it'll sink without trace, and then you're just wasting your time. You're writing content that's not being shared. And I should talk about that. When I talk about not being shared, I pulled 1 million posts at random the other year. The median number of shares was 8 across all social networks. So it's like 2 tweets, 2 Facebook likes. So what that means is that even the people who wrote the content aren't sharing it. Your own teams aren't sharing it. And if your own teams aren't sharing your content, why the hell should anybody else share it? So your first start point on influencer advocacy is your teams have to share the content. You need to build momentum. Now, you might want to use tools for that. You might just want to preset tweets for them to share. But if you're an organization with 1,000 people, you should be getting a lot of tweets every time you publish because you're going to get some momentum. And I've seen tweets from huge companies get 10 shares. These are companies with 10,000 employees get 10 shares. So my view is it's a completely useless article because they're not promoting it, they're not pushing it. I'm not even bothered going to read that. So you've got to think about how do you use, what influencers do you have, and you can get some momentum just from within inside your own organizations. But certainly, you have to share your own content. Interestingly, on BuzzSumo, we don't index content generally if it has 0 shares. We work on the principle, which may be wrong, but if not a single person has shared the article, not even the person who published it, it's probably not very valuable. And so we don't put it into our database. We crawl it, but we don't put it in the database. That gets rid of over 70% of content on the internet. It means that we can be efficiently to index the other stuff. We don't have to index everything like Google has to. We can be much more efficient because a lot of people just publish and don't even share it themselves. So yeah, you've got to think about how you get your content amplified and start with your own staff, your own small teams to amplify that content. You probably all have 4 social media accounts. That's 4. 10 of you, that's 40 shares. You just get going straight away.
Awesome. Amazing stuff. Final question, because we've just run out of time. This came from the hashtag. What's the important, again, something we talked about this morning, what's the importance of dark social, do you think?
Yeah, I'm less convinced by the points. I mean, people do share stuff not via Twitter stuff. They email people. So dark social may be sharing it via email, via WhatsApp. That's important. It happens, etc. But in some ways, dark social, you're probably only going to share it with a certain small size of audience via email. The great thing about sharing it publicly is it goes much wider than that and gives you more advocacy. I think it's useful to track it, but I think what's important at the moment is to get bigger traction, which is publicly sharing. You want bigger influencers and people to publicly share what you're doing. And it's only one way. That's only one part of this multiple broadcast approach. Other ways are always email your people. I mean, what I'd say is when you publish a piece of content, what's the promotion strategy? You're going to email this segment of your database. You're going to get these influencers to share it. You're going to promote it on Facebook ads or whatever you're going to do. You're going to get your staff to share it. But you have a promotion strategy for each piece of content. You can't just publish it and expect people to find it. I just don't think that works.
Super valuable. Guys, Steve Rayson, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.